Hello and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast with me, Rich Ferraro. We're just a few weeks into the 24-25 season and Nottingham Forest are still unbeaten. Hurrah! With Morgan Gibbs-White making his England bow. Hurrah! And there's a reasonable transfer window as well for the club. Hallelujah! So today, our Forest Ramble discussion will cover players in and out at the club, an unbeaten start for the Reds, international duty, remembering those who have left us, and getting quizzical with Guess That Red. All this and more coming up in this episode of 1865, the original and intelligent Nottingham Forest podcast. So let's welcome our panellists for this episode. And although Forest have 5 points out of 9 so far, how many do you think it should be, Tom Newton?
Morning. I'm going to go with 7, and it's not necessarily Bournemouth didn't deserve the point. It's just that last 4 minutes or whatever it was that we lost concentration and let a goal in. So I'm going to say 7 points because it would have been nice to start the season with 3 points against Bournemouth. Then the other 2 games probably got what we deserved really in terms of when it's Southampton we was the better side, and there was not really much to separate us and Wolves last week. So I would go to 7, but I'm not too disappointed with 5 to be honest.
Okay, same question to you, Steven Toplis.
I would say 7 as well. I think we could have turned one of our home draws into a win, whether that was Bournemouth or Wolves.
Mm-hmm. And Baz, are you going to go with the other 2 there, or do you have any different feelings?
Yeah, I have to say 7 because apparently we've had the most shots out of any team in the Premier League. And we have Europe's most clinical striker, but we've only got 3 goals, which is kind of disappointing. And I think that's going to be the factor that's going to pretty much decide our season, because I think everywhere else we look pretty decent now.
Yeah, and of course you alluded to that in the Wolves report. You said, we're doing most things right. It's just a question of actually putting them away. So just very briefly, what do you think is the key to that? Is it down to the strikers, or is it down to sharpness? Is it down to something else?
I think, well, certainly with Bournemouth, I think, yeah, they were fitter than us, and that's why we faded at the end. But and they've shown already this season that they finished strongly. So we need to make sure we keep that concentration. And with Wolves as well, it was that conceding not pretty much straight after. Well, conceding from the kickoff, which we did with Newcastle as well. Mm-hmm. So there's a level of concentration we need to keep. But I mean, if Chris Wood is clinical, he doesn't get many chances, but the ones he does, 40%, that's a lot to put away. So I think it needs to be the rest of the team have to actually improve their shooting, because that's where the shots are coming from.
Yeah. Just Tom, I'm just going to come back to you about that Wolves goal, because Forest had just scored, and of course, you get taught when you're playing football, well, the time that you're most vulnerable is just after you've scored a goal. On the one hand, I think the neutral will say, well, it's an absolute screamer by Bellegarde, but on the other hand, Forest fans are saying, well, we gave the ball away and conceded it too easily. What do you think?
Pretty much it is. As soon as it left his foot, it was, but like says, we haven't helped the situation in terms of Sangai. We're getting there streetwise, but yeah, we need to be more, like Baz has said, we've got to concentrate more better and key points of the game.
Yeah, we just lost you there for some of that there, Tom, but we got your point nice and clear. We'll come back to some of those issues a little bit later on. Before we start, though, it occurred to me that we don't really shout enough about our podcasting. So for those of you who aren't aware, Baz and I started blogging about Forest, I think it's actually 20 odd years ago, probably in the Kinnear/Megson era, when blogs were a new thing. And then when the Reds got promoted from League One, Baz, you had the bright idea of doing something called a podcast. And as I recall, I remember you saying, well, we're going to the matches, so why don't we just sit down and talk about them for 15 minutes afterwards? And it was an era before we had easily accessible internet commentary, before we had streaming of matches. I remember in those days when we started blogging, I was still using dial-up and annoying my housemates by by watching the live text commentary from the BBC website. And the one that you always alluded to is when it says something like Maloney takes attacking throwing for Forest. So you were live tweeting from matches, which being quite an early adopter of tech, you kind of, I think you had something called a MiFi, didn't you, to get around the Wi-Fi restrictions. But let's blow our own trumpet. We pioneered the idea of a club-based, fan-led podcast. So Baz, that's why I've been making a lot of effort recently to refer to us as the original Nottingham Forest podcast. Talk us through what it was that made you think, you know what, this might be a good idea.
Well, there's two. I mean, we started the blog. I definitely remember writing a piece defending Gary Megson when we were getting relegated.
How did that work out for you?
Exactly. But it was more, we can't just do the knee-jerk change the manager sort of thing. And then, I can remember that the podcasts, there were a few, but it was mainly sort of like, obviously, it was kind of a tech niche sort of thing. And I just thought, it's not that it's hard work writing, but it's much easier just to get your thoughts out by recording them straight after. So we might as well do it. And then, the audience definitely came from the live tweeting because no one else was doing that. Nowadays, obviously, you've got the clubs doing it themselves. You've got fans all doing it. But the number of important issues I must have missed and gone to you, what happened there? Because I was head down typing something out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
But as I remember it, we like back in the days when having tens of thousands of followers was like a big deal. Nowadays, obviously, like proper celebrities have millions, but back then we got to 12 or 15,000 followers in like 2 or 3 months, which is quite amazing. And obviously that then fed into the podcast as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, with every up comes downs, and we did knock it on the head for a little while in about 2014. There's a whole 2013, I think it was, a whole succession of events that happened, which was all precipitated by Fawaz's decision to sack Sean O'Driscoll, basically. But let's just say that being a Forest supporter and talking about it or sharing your views publicly wasn't much fun at that time, was it, Baz? So we knocked it on the head. Then we made an ill-advised comeback for about 3 matches, and then, which coincided with the return of Billy Davies, I think. We and I think that's probably a reflection upon the life and times we're in. I think, don't you think? Would you agree?
I think it would be a bit of an understatement to say most of the time we were doing the podcast and the blog and everything, the life of a Forest supporter wasn't great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But and it's nice to know that we also got blanked by Billy Davies.
Would you like to share more on that for any listeners who...
Just that I can remember reaching out to him a couple of times on Twitter. It was his cousin, wasn't it? What's it, Jim something?
Jim Price.
Yeah, and getting completely blanked by him. So there we go.
Yeah. And then Stephen, in that little gap where 1865 was missing, you were doing something which a title that has now been appropriated elsewhere, which if I remember rightly, you called it Forest Fan TV. And that's when you and I kind of got to know each other a little bit because we'd both been doing a bit of blogging and kind of seen each other around in the interwebs, hadn't we?
Yeah, I'd done some blogging for the original 1865 podcast, and then I started up a YouTube channel called Forest Fan TV, which was intended to be match reports, reaction from fans. You could say it was a bit of a precursor to the fan channels that exist now. But again, much like your experiences, it probably wasn't a great time to be creating content around Forest, and it sort of petered out. And also the company I was working for at the time, they sort of petered out and took the resources away, so to speak. So that's where we linked up, and then when 1865 came back, I then joined you and was part of the team, and that's coming up a good 10 years ago now since Forest Fan TV, which, yes, did have absolutely no link to the modern Forest Fan TV and the people on there. So yes, going to make that clear. Two very separate entities.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering if there's enough for a legal case for you to get some royalties from their earnings. I don't know. So we kind of relaunched 1865 as it is under the title Forest Ramble, which the Football Ramble podcast were not too happy about. So hence me saying that maybe you could get something from Forest Fan TV. That's a joke, by the way. But we started, I think it was when Mark Warburton was in charge, wasn't it? We kind of relaunched the podcast, and then I think one of the key watershed moments, as it was in so many ways, was when lockdown occurred and we suddenly realized, hey, we could do this remotely. We could report on every match because we were able to watch every match all of a sudden. Back in the day when Baz and I did it, it was home matches because that's all we went to most of the time. So yeah, it suddenly became a very different beast. And of course, there are many, many Forest podcasts around these days, but we always hope that we've stuck to being a podcast with integrity, doing things in a very trying to be considered, not knee-jerk, as you mentioned there, Baz. So for those of you who join us regularly, we want to say thank you. And for those of you who are new to what we're doing, then please stick with us. And this is the original Nottingham Forest podcast. Now, the one thing we haven't been able to report upon in those 16 years of podcasting have been the idea of a Forest player wearing the three lions for the senior team. So hot off the press is on Saturday. Morgan Gibbs-White made his England debut. And Tom, you've just rejoined us, hopefully with a slightly more reliable connection. And the last Forest player to represent the senior England team was Stuart Pearce at the tail end of his time at the City Ground back in 1997. There were a lot of Forest fans on Saturday saying they felt like proud parents. So, Tom, did you feel the same? How did it make you feel to see a Reds player wearing that white shirt for England?
Well, for the last 10 minutes, it feels like I've just stepped into 1997 with this internet connection. So, great crossroads. No, it just shows you how far we've fallen in the last 20 odd years. When it's like 27-year gap since the last England player who represented England to be from Forest, because obviously late 80s we had like Steve Hodge, Neil Webb, Nigel Clough, etc., and Stuart Pearce and Des Walker. So it was a nice feeling to see Morgan Gibbs-White make his debut yesterday for the England senior team. And another thing, it's well deserved. And when he did step onto the pitch, as we all saw, it looks like he's been a part of the England squad for years, because he just slotted into his normal number 10 role, set Saka up for a chance. And the only downside yesterday was he only got 15 minutes, which it would have been nice to have half an hour, because to be honest, we was head and shoulders better than Ireland. And it would have been nice for him to come on 60 minutes. And I was watching the telly yesterday saying to the telly, just get Gibbs-White on, because obviously Grealish had got his goal, and even Sam Matterface on RTV says I think the game just needs something a bit different. And when he did come on 75 minutes, it was a very proud moment, and we're all proud of Morgan, and sincerely hope he's here for years to come, because he's been an absolute integral part of us maintaining our Premier League status.
Actually, Baz, that's an interesting one, because obviously, lots of people accused us of overpaying for Morgan at the time, and the way that the payments are staged. There's some speculation about whether international appearances would sort of make up some of the fee or whatever. But I think we'd all agree that actually, in modern footballing terms, even if we do end up paying £42.5 million in total, that's probably a good deal. But The other thing that I would say is that Morgan, like you say, he didn't look out of place. It's well deserved, and the fact that a Forest player can get called up, despite the fact that we've finished 16th and 17th in the last two seasons, the fact that he does enough to show that he can do that at international level. And he came on and looked good, looked busy, looked energetic, looked like he wasn't just a player with ability, but a player with work rate. I remember the commentators saying yesterday, "Oh, he just keeps moving, doesn't he?" So lots to be proud of there.
Definitely. I think the whole thing about the outcry about how much we spent when we came up is, in retrospect, with most people would probably say actually it was needed, and the amount we paid for Morgs is in line with what you pay for a decent Premier League player. The amount we paid in general, you compare it to how much Burnley, I've said this before, how much Burnley paid to stay up, and we squeaked through two seasons in a row. So we didn't overpay for anything, and it's exactly right that Morgs got the call up because he is that good.
And when we were younger, as Tom alluded to, we were used to seeing 4 or 5 Forest players in England squads regularly. So to have that big gap, that's probably one of the reasons why, you've got a younger generation who've never seen a Forest player in an England shirt, but then you've got people like us who have gone a long, long, long time without seeing a Forest player in an England shirt. So yeah, that's why there's so much pride, isn't there?
And yeah, it's kind of a little bit sad from our point of view that we're not going to see 4 or 5 in an England shirt. But that's just the way Premier League squads work now. You're not going to have that many. Unless you're right at the top, you're not going to be able to hoover up all the best England players. But yeah, Morgs is a good start. Let's get Yatesy in next.
Yeah, I was just going to say. I mean, they were saying in the Euros, weren't they? It's like, well, we need someone who can sit deep in midfield and run through. So that's the obvious choice. I mean,
imagine it, Yatesy against I don't know, like a Spain or something. It'd be just that hands on his back and shoving him over, and brilliant.
Hey, you know what? If Conor Gallagher can do it for England, then there's no reason why Yatesy can't. And Stephen, the other thing about, I guess, Morgan and his transfer fee, and that's been alluded to so far, is his ambitions. Hopefully, it'll help keep him at the City Ground for a long time if he can make appearances for England while still playing for Forest, and actually wearing the armband regularly for Forest as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I look at examples such as Eberechi Eze at Crystal Palace. Now, they've managed to keep hold of him for a good couple of seasons now since he's got into the England team, and he's become, since Michael Elise and Wilfried Zaha left, he's become their talisman, if you like. And Gibbs-White is very much that for us. So I'm hopeful that as long as he knows he can get into England squads while he's a Forest player, that will be enough to keep him at the club.
Quite a lot of Forest players, as usual, involved in international action. So at under 21 level, we saw Elliot Anderson for England, Aaron Donnelly and Dale Taylor for Northern Ireland. We saw Eric da Silva Moreira playing for Germany under 19s. And then at senior level, Nico Williams, Anthony Elanga, Ramon Sosa, Chris Woods, Taiwo Wanyenola Aina, Willy Bolly, Ibrahim Sangare, and although they're not first choice, Omar Deli and Sells were both called up by Ireland and Belgium. And also another notable international achievement, I guess, which was that Nikola Milenkovic not only played for Serbia at over the weekend, but he was also the skipper. Stephen, from what you've seen of him so far, do you think that there's potential for him to be, to wear the armband for Forest as well?
Yeah, he just has a great presence about him, and he's somebody who he already is come in, and he looks like he's got a good character as well. I think he might even be straight away part of the leadership group at Forest, I was reading. So that just shows you the influence he has, and it's a combination of his experience and his ability. If you look at for example, how Murillo's been performing this season next to him, he looks far more assured next to Milenkovic. And I wonder if that character is rubbing off on Murillo a bit, and it's helping him to play even better than last season. And to be able to captain your country as well, and that's a sign that he's got good character and he's a proper leader. You don't captain your country unless you are a player like that. So yeah, there's no reason why he couldn't be a future Forest captain, or certainly vice captain at some point in the future. Definitely.
Yeah, and Tom, you saw Milenkovic make his debut down at Southampton. So two things from that match. Number one is Milenkovic. I mean, I didn't see the match. You were there. By all accounts, it was one of the most assured debuts you could wish to have seen. And straight away, I think there were a few Forest fans rather, saying this guy could wear the armband for the Reds in the future.
Yeah, when it's like he's not come from like a nothing club. He's come from Fiorentina, who, apart from like your Inter Milan's, AC Milan's, and Juventus in Serie A, they are a prestige club and everything. And to swap that for whatever reason and come to Forest, whether it was financial because of Fiorentina, he does come with like a presence, as Steven says about him. And he's played at World Cups and European Championships, and even if in the game against England, he kept Harry Kane quiet and Jude Bellingham. I know Jude Bellingham scored early in the game, but apart from that, Jude Bellingham probably didn't do much in that game. So, and then when you've seen him in the flesh and his presence and everything, and he can play a bit, we have got a top player. And with that aura about him, you can see that he's got really good leadership qualities, and you never know. And I know Ryan Yates and Morgan Gibbs-White are the two like captains, if you know what I mean, but he could quite easily step in and lead the side if them two are absent for whatever reason.
Yeah. Just also on the Southampton match, I have to say I was a bit underwhelmed when I saw the Man City style third kits that Forest had launched. But then seeing Forest wear it at Southampton, it looked pretty sexy. Did it look as good in the flesh?
Yeah, it did. When you look at it, you think, oh, how's it going to look in the flesh? And I was like you, a bit, it's a bit plain, but when you look at it, and then I've actually seen it in the flesh in the club shop, it is a nice shirt. And the away kit, like the dark blue, purple, and this one, they are quite nice kits, to be honest. And as people know on Instagram, I do like my like kits and things like that, with obviously the sideline of selling shirts, etc. So yeah, they are nice shirts, and it's nice that it's a bit different from like the normal shirts we've been having, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and if you like vintage football shirts, and I'm talking about originals rather than the replicas you can get, then follow Tom at TNewton1988 on Instagram. Let's move on. And Steven, obviously one of the curios about football is that the season starts and then the transfer window shuts afterwards. So you have kindly put together a quick summary of the major ins and outs from our transfer window. So over to you.
I think this is going to be a lot shorter than in previous seasons, so that's a bonus anyway. But yeah, going back to the start of the window, Forest signed midfielder Marcos Domenic from Red Star Belgrade, but he's gone on loan to Olympiacos for the season. We then had Eric da Silva Moreira signing from St Pauli for about £1.5 million. Following him was Elliot Anderson from Newcastle, and the deal that also saw Odysseus Lakadimos going to Newcastle. The rumour is Forest spent about 35 million on Anderson, Newcastle 20 million on Lakadimos. So already that 15 million that we've supposedly paid for Elliot Anderson looks an absolute bargain. And after that, Carlos Miguel, another goalkeeper from Corinthians, for about £3.5 million. Nikola Milenkovic, who we've just been talking about, from Fiorentina, for 12 million. Jota Silva from Vitoria for 11 million. Ramon Sosa from Talleres for 9.3 million. Alex Moreiro then came in from Aston Villa on loan to cover the left-back slot. David Carmo came in from Porto for 12.6 million, but much like Marcos Domenic, he's going on loan to Olympiacos for the season. And then on deadline day, we had the arrivals of Brazilian defender Morato from Benfica for £15 million and James Ward-Prowse signing on loan from West Ham, which is probably one of the standout deals for me in terms of the quality that Forest are bringing in and how they've managed to do it. In terms of departures, did you want to?
No. I was just going to say. So you've mentioned a couple of departures there in terms of new players who've come in terms of Stamanic and Carmo. Is it going to be another one of those where we're never going to see him playing in a Forest shirt?
It does feel that way, doesn't it, when players go to Olympiacos? But I do wonder, particularly these players, they're still quite young and have got a lot of football ahead of them. You know, this isn't somebody like Wang Hyo coming in who's 27, 28, and if he's not going to get in the Forest team, he probably never will. Stamenic and Carmo do seem like players for the future, so I wonder if they are going to Olympiacos for development and then see if they're good enough to get into the Forest squad after that, maybe.
And speaking of Hwang, well, he's where we can start in terms of players leaving, because this is relatively hot off the press. Not been reported by Forest yet, but he seems to have gone to Turkey, doesn't he?
Yeah, so he's moved to Alanyaspor in Turkey. He was with them previously on loan last season, and according to their club website, he has signed a 1-year contract with them and returns to Turkish football. So that's another exit from Forest this season to add to a couple of others. Orhan Mangala to Lyon for 30 million to make a loan deal permanent. He's now come back to the Premier League and gone to Everton on loan. Also going to Lyon, Moussa Niakate for 27 million. And I think those two deals in particular were quite big for PSR. Getting in the best part of, 60 million for the two of them has allowed Forest that bit of freedom this summer in the transfer market without having to sell one of the crown jewels such as Morgan Gibbs-White or Murillo. Joe Worrell left for Burnley for 5 million. And that brings to an end a long association with Forest for Joe Worrell. And we spoke about it a bit nearer the time, but his history and achievements with the club will never be forgotten, helping Forest get into the Premier League. And we spoke about David Carmo on loan and Marco Stamenic on loan to Olympiacos. Also going out on loan on deadline day, Matt Turner to Crystal Palace. And from our point of view, we were looking to get rid of him anyway. He's clearly not the kind of keeper that we were really looking for. And much has been said about his game and how he doesn't fit in at Forest. So he's gone to Crystal Palace to bolster their goalkeeping options. And also just in terms of wrapping things up, Felipe retired, Czech Kouyaté retired, Czech Kouyaté was released, Wayne Hennessy was released, and so too Scott McKenna and Harry Arter finally exiting the City ground after 30 years with the club.
And Harry Arter and Hwang are going to go down in history, Baz, as two of the greatest Forest signings ever.
It's certainly, I can see in 10 years' time us doing Guess That Red.
Well, I never played. But I was paid £40,000.
40 grand a week.
Yeah. On the subject of PSR, Tom, Forest, we reported in Friday 5 that Forest had one of the lowest net spends in the Premier League, or certainly in the bottom third of the net spend table. That's really, really important, isn't it? And means that we're not having to rely on loopholes and, shall we say, creative accounting in this particular financial period. You know who I'm talking about, don't you, Tom?
Yeah, and the good thing about it is that regarding the money, obviously they freed up a decent pot of money for a striker, what ultimately didn't come in. And for the first time, we haven't just got a striker in for the sake of getting a striker in. They've actually think, well, we couldn't get Jimenez in, we couldn't get Marmoush in, we couldn't get Nketiah in. Let's just save that money for January or whatever. Because like last year, we panicked, didn't we? And got Origi and Michy Batshuayi rumoured to be coming in, and got Origi instead, and it didn't really work out. So at least they've said, right, we're happy with the striker we've got. It would have been nice to get a striker in, but at least we haven't been held to ransom on a striker who ultimately might not do anything. So I think Forest have been very prudent in the this transfer window. They've got Deadwood out, and they've done really well with the PSR rules in terms of Mangala going, Niakate going, and obviously the deal with Elliot Anderson, which we've already mentioned. So all in all, I think it's probably the best window we've had since we've probably been promoted, if not under the Marinakis regime, because it looks like there's a real plan there. They've got, if you look at that squad compared to the one what went up to Newcastle 2 years ago, there's some real quality in there. The players are relatively young, so there's a resale value for the likes of Murillo. We obviously don't want him to leave, but you've got to know where you are in the food chain and kind of thing. But I've never had a problem for us selling players. It's just how to replace them, and I think they've got a collective plan now. If say get Morato in, I think they brought him in on the eventuality that Murillo will go. So it's obviously they've done it a year early, and clubs do that. Palace have done it, haven't they, in the past, and Brighton seem to be the pioneers of doing it, etc. So if Forest go down that route, I've got no qualms, because obviously it'd be nice to keep your better players, but obviously if the bigger clubs come circling, then obviously needs must, and you might have to cut your cloth accordingly and make sure you're still competitive at the same time.
And Tom, I'm going to give you the opportunity to say what you think about Leicester and Chelsea. Leicester have been, according to an independent panel, the charges against them under PSR can't stick because they were technically not a Premier League club at the time the Premier League brought charges. And Chelsea, apparently, we know that they sell a lot of players at good rates, including homegrown, so they're getting that pure profit. But they also relied upon selling 2 hotels to themselves. So I want to give you a minute to be able to have your say.
To be honest, I'm not blaming the clubs. I think the clubs have basically done something, and it's up to the rule makers, i.e. the Premier League, Richard Masters and his army of people, to actually sort the rules out accordingly. You can't keep changing it and moving the goalposts. So, I mean, we got done for 2 years being in the Championship and got a 4-point deduction, but then Leicester, because they weren't in the league, they can't be done for it because obviously they weren't a Premier League club, etc. So it just goes down to the rule makers. If there's a loophole there, the clubs are going to go through it, and it's up to the Premier League to shut it down, kind of thing. And Richard Masters, he just keeps changing the goalposts all the time, etc. And there's no consistency with it. So yeah, don't blame the clubs. You've got to blame the Premier League on this, because they're the ones who should be regulating the rules, and obviously they're not doing it.
And Baz, on a completely different subject, Carlos Miguel obviously has come in and he's made a good debut, I think, overall, when he played against Newcastle in the Cup. But there was a really tragic backstory that was written about in The Athletic, which was quite shocking to read about, wasn't it?
Yeah, apparently, so what they say that part of the reason his personality is the way he is, he's quite laid back, he's quite calm about stuff. But that's because when he was a kid, when he was 7 years old, his parents were murdered in their own house while him and his brother hid under the bed upstairs, which is an unbelievable situation to be in. And so therefore, after that, he was raised by his auntie and his grandma. And his dad was a goalkeeper, so that's why he went into goalkeeping to sort of continue that tradition, which is an awful place to be in. But he says it's kind of his personality comes from that, and that's why he deals with things the way he does. So hopefully he can have happier times with us.
Yeah, and as with, I guess the fact that he does seem to have kind of quite a happy personality obviously comes from that. If you haven't read the article, I know The Athletic is behind a paywall, but it is available on The Athletic, and it is very much worth reading about because it is quite an extraordinary story. Also, on a lighter and happier note, he was brought up by two of his aunties and his grandma, and the photo of 6'8" Carlos Miguel with his 4'9" grandma is something to behold. So that's definitely worth looking at. And with that, we come to time for a break in the podcast. We will be back in just a moment.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Welcome back to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast, and I just want to take a minute to share a few words from our friends at FanHub. If you're following us on social media, you will see us post our team predictions on match days, and if you register as a Forest fan on the app, you can gain rewards and stay in touch with your fellow Reds fans. So use our golden ticket code 186-ERG, and you can skip the waiting list. And it also supports us here at 1865 Towers. So you can find all the links to listen to this podcast and for our social media at 1865.football. Now, we finished part one with a bit of a tragic story surrounding Carlos Miguel's family, his parents, the way he lost his parents. And over the summer, we also had some sad news as Forest fans with the loss of Kevin Campbell. And we haven't really had a chance to talk about it properly yet. Now, Baz, I'm coming to you because you and I were regularly watching the Reds together when Kev joined the club. I think it's fair to say he had a difficult first season with injuries and everything, but he's clearly a likeable character and he went on to really come good. So if you just want to share a few thoughts and memories, really.
Yeah, so he came in effectively as a replacement for Stan Collymore, who went on a 6-month marred the season before. I think I've said before, Stan Collymore is probably the second, maybe even the first most talented player I've ever seen in the flesh. And so replacing him was always going to be a massive, massive tall order. But Frank Clark knew him because he had him on loan at Leyton Orient when he was younger. Because obviously Kevin Campbell started at Arsenal, went on loan to Leyton Orient. I think he scored 9 goals or something in 18 appearances there. Yeah. So Frank Clark knew him and he brought in Kevin Campbell and Chris Bart-Williams, who he also knew. And both of them, to be fair, probably got to a pretty slow start. I think Kevin Campbell got maybe 3 goals in his first season.
And lots of injuries.
Yeah, and lots of injuries. And yeah, the back injury in particular sort of hampered him. And he only got 6 goals. But that second season was the one where we were in Europe. We were the last team in Europe, as we joyously used to sing. And I can remember the Bayern Munich game, and we were basically he struggled to score throughout, and then the Bayern Munich game, on paper we were totally outclassed, but I thought we were their equals. They just happened to score many more than us, and I can remember I couldn't watch the game back for ages. I started watching it, and I was like, "He's amazing! He was absolutely amazing." So. There was hints of his talent. He was a big lad. He was powerful. He was fast. He used to like to play quite often right up on the shoulder of the defender, even though at Arsenal he had Ian Wright alongside him, so he'd end up playing a bit deeper. But for us, he played up on the shoulder, and then everything came good for him. The season in what was then called the First Division was when he really, really came good with 22 goals. Pierre Van Hooijdonk getting 34. And that partnership, I think it was supposed to be the most goals of any strike partnership in Europe that year, and took us straight back up. And then the Turkish transfer window struck.
Tom, in retrospect, Campbell evolved as a player even in his time at Forest, didn't he? Because I remember seeing him as a youngster at Arsenal. Of course, as a youngster, you are going to be a bit more, even though he's a big lad, he's more skinny, he was more lithe. By the time he was at Forest, he was bulking up a bit more. And especially with his time out with injuries, you could see him kind of becoming a much more kind of burly presence, but still with that pace and that kind of, that flash of kind of, what's the word? Explosiveness, let's put it that way.
I really enjoyed him that season because if you remember, Van Hooijdonk took the free kicks and the penalties, but a lot of the goals what Campbell scored were like proper strikers, finishers, if you can put it. And yeah, it was just a shame that we didn't keep him for that Premier League season in 98-99. And I think he did a lot of the donkey work for Pierre Van Hooijdonk because holding up, he used to come deep, if you remember. And Van Hooijdonk didn't really do that. He thought he was like, Dave Bassett's alluded to him, he thought he was like better than the whole division put together, which he was in a way. But yeah, Kevin Campbell that season, he's phenomenal. The legwork he had to do for Van Hooijdonk and everything. That's not like discounting what Van Hooijdonk did, but yeah, a lot of it was down to Kevin Campbell and his willingness to hold the ball up, running, come deep, etc. So yeah, it was just a massive shame that what happened in the summer of '98, and obviously, as we mentioned on the mini tribute, what we did on the special pod in the summer, football was a lesser place without Kev Campbell being around anymore because he was infectious to the game he loved.
Yeah, and Stephen, just to follow on that, I mean, what's been astonishing is that the amount of people from all corners of the country actually saying how much they loved Kevin Campbell because he wasn't just a player, he was a big personality. And I remember seeing him driving around in his open top BMW, always had a smile on his face. Both him and Bartman had BMWs, and you see him driving around with their music on and big smiles on their faces. So that's the kind of personality we remember. But also, again, that evolution as a player, Van Hooijdonk wore number 9 and Campbell wore number 10. And I remember reading something where Campbell realised when Ian Wright joined Arsenal that I can't just be the centre forward as I grew up thinking I was going to be. I had to adapt my game. And as Tom mentioned, he really did bring a lot of the other players into play and was a really kind of really good link man as well as a really good striker.
He was, yeah. He could do a bit of everything. When you look at how he went on at Everton after coming back to the Premier League, and him alongside Duncan Ferguson formed a really good partnership. But Campbell was also, by this point, a more regular goal scorer. And you look at Everton, for example, he actually came back to the Premier League later in the 98-99 season, went to Everton, who were also struggling in the bottom reaches of the Premier League, and helped to keep them up. And I look back on our season of 98-99, it's a great lost opportunity. Had we been able to keep Campbell and Van Hooijdonk together and some of those other players in that side, what we could have done, having come up so convincingly from Division 1. Because, yeah, you look at the way that Campbell performed at Everton, he went in there, made an immediate impact, scored plenty of goals, kept them up, and then went on and became an important player for them over the next 4 or 5 years. And yeah, he was a good player, he was a good person, and a very difficult person to dislike in football. Even as a player, seeing him go on to other clubs, you just wished him all the very best because he's such a great character, such a nice guy, and it was good to see him later in his career get back to the Premier League and have some real success at Everton and show what a good player he was.
And a couple of things that occurred to me. Number one is I hope that Mangala going off to Lyon and then coming back to Everton doesn't bite us in the same way as Kevin Campbell doing that back then does. But then the other thing that's worth mentioning, Tom, is Kev, obviously after retiring, he did have a career in the media, and it says a lot about how likeable he was, that he's a man who could get away with wearing a bow tie on television and still come across as a good guy.
Yeah, and every time I actually saw him a couple of years ago at the South Bank City, he did I think it was a a reunion of the players from that 95-96 UEFA Cup campaign, and he was immaculate then, immaculately dressed, beaming smile, what lit up the room and everything, and yeah, he's just such a lovable guy. And when you did see him on like Sky Sports or whatever, and he just, like he says, he's one of those people who, because of his love for the game, he wasn't boring to listen to. And then obviously he had that like infectious laugh as well. And he's like I says, he's sorely missed. Well, Kev.
Baz.
Just a couple of other points on that. So, first of all, it's not just like his pace and his power as well. So I remember going to see Arsenal away at Highbury, and the seats we had were right down at pitch level. So we were like level with the grass. And I think it was the game that he scored against Arsenal.
Yes, it very much was, yeah.
But what I also remember is him receiving the ball just in front of us, like probably 6 yards in front of us. And he did this amazing, like, we wouldn't have been surprised to see Morgan Gibbs-White doing it, like this skip and jump over the ball and taking it and dragging it past Arsenal's defenders, who are renowned as absolutely amazing. And it was a level of skill that you wouldn't have expected from a big lad like that. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, you mentioned about him and Chris Bart-Williams driving around with their music. Both of them were DJs, and both of them loved their music as well. At a time when Forest were renowned for Stuart Pearce playing new wave and punk in the dressing room, they brought a bit of a modernity with a house and garage into there.
yeah. And I mean, we're talking about them, and what an absolute shame that, two relatively young men are no longer with us. Baz, on that topic as well, I know this has nothing to do with Forest, but obviously regular listeners will know that you live in Leeds, and we did lose another one of the good guys from football very recently, Sol Bamba, who played for Leeds, Leicester, Cardiff, and Middlesbrough, amongst others. No Forest connection there, but another big loss to the game.
A very indirect Forest connection, because Neil Warnock loved him, and Neil Warnock obviously loves Forest as well. But I spoke to a few Leeds fans about him, just like what their memories were, and all of them said they had a few things in common. One was he was an incredible footballer, and he was the sort of player you could build your entire squad around, because he was dependable, and he was in the right place at the right time, and he was strong, and he had leadership qualities. The other was that when he signed for Leeds, they were lost. And all the fans I spoke to were like, and I really, really didn't care. And that just sounded very, very familiar, as we've touched on already. As Forest fans, it's like, it doesn't matter how good your players are if the club's lost.
And he had a Joe Worrell moment, I believe, when he was still technically on loan, where he did criticise those around him and said, well, people need to pull their finger out. But I think he directed it as much at the club hierarchy as he did as his fellow players. And if I remember rightly, I think he actually was appointed, not necessarily appointed, but he captained Leeds quite a lot when he was still actually on loan. So and wore the armband at every club that he ever played for, which speaks volumes for the man. So at 39 years old, a sad loss to the game. But now it's back to our regular content, and it's time for this.
1865. Guess that read.
So it's time for our regular quiz. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, basically we're going to ask Quizmaster Tom to ask us some questions. We're trying to guess which Reds player or players he is talking about. So do play along at home, won't you? And Quizmaster Tom, it's over to you. Now, I want to point out that normally the winner of this game gets to choose our outro music for the podcast, but we've had a bit of a pre-podcast discussion, and we all know which song is going to be played at the end of this one. It may be connected to the PSR issues that we talked about a little bit earlier. But anyway, over to you, Tom.
Right, so first question is, I was joint top scorer in Europe in the 84-85 season. Nope. Okay, second question. During my career, I played for 13 clubs. I played 534 games and scored 182 goals.
Stephen.
Go on.
Is it Lee Chapman?
No, it isn't.
You know, because he played abroad, didn't he, before he joined Forest?
He was in France, wasn't he?
France, yeah.
Yeah.
There was a connection there, maybe. But
Was it Neon or someone like that?
Neon.
Yeah, that's the one, yeah. Third question. I was signed by Brian Clough in the 1992-1993 season.
Stephen.
Go on.
Gary Bannister?
It is Gary Bannister.
What?
Yeah.
Look,
That is I plucked that one. So
Europe.
thank you very much.
Yes.
No,
you've got to expand on that first clue there, Tom.
So basically, he was playing for QPR he signed for QPR from Sheffield Wednesday in 1984. So in the 84-85 season, he scored 28 goals, which he was joint top scorer in Europe. So he shared it with a Yugoslavian player called Edin Bajic or someone like that. He scored 28 goals. So he got the most goals joint in Europe that season of 28.
You've got to give us what the other questions are going to be.
The last question, which was question 5, I scored 8 goals during the 92-93 season, and I was effectively a replacement for Teddy Sheringham. So you would have got it on question 5.
Would have got it. Well, congratulations, Stephen.
It could have been either. I wonder if Big Bob Rosario was ever top scorer in Europe for a season.
I wonder if he was ever top scorer in any team ever.
It was some come down, wasn't it? I know Brian Clough was coming to the end of his powers by then, but to go from Teddy Sheringham potentially getting a young Stan Collymore in that season to effectively end up with Big Bob Rosario and Gary Bannister, was only going to go down one way, and that was down. And so
and I remember starting the next season all excited about signing Stan, and we had Rosario and Glover up front because Stan wasn't available. And also, Baz, you're talking about that Forest away match down at Highbury, and the other thing I remember about that particular game was the fact that there was a Forest supporter trying to start a Salenzi chant, and I don't think it went that well.
Great Forest strikers of our time.
Exactly. Gary Bannister, though, he was the very definition, Stephen, wasn't he, of a journeyman striker who had an old pro's haircut as well.
Yeah, classic short hair, back and sides, nice and trim, side parting. So very much in Brian Clough's wheelhouse and in that regard. Yeah, he liked his players to have short, smart haircuts, didn't he?
And I'll always say that I remember the summer after Cloughie left the club, seeing a few Forest players. I don't know, I must have been down near Home Pierpoint or something, seeing a few Forest players there and going, "Who's that?" And it was Scott Gemmell, because he'd grown his hair out now that Brian Clough wasn't the gaffer anymore. So that congratulations to you, Stephen. As I say, I think we've chosen our outro song already, so that will start to play in just a second. All that's left is for me to say thank you very much to Tom, Stephen, and to Baz, and also to Sports Social for their continued support for our podcast. Listeners, remember that we have a range of shows throughout the week, including our women's football podcast on Wednesday. Forest women are playing Stourbridge at home on Sunday, which is the day that we're recording. So we'll bring you an update in midweek. We'll have our Friday 5 news roundup at the end of the week, and we will resume our Premier League match reports at the weekend, and we bring you reports after every game, home and away. So until then, thank you, listener, for joining us, and come on, you Reds.